Hi, just a quick reminder that this podcast has merch, a Patreon, a Fiverr gig, and some affiliated links. The links to everything that I just mentioned will be in the show notes. Alright, now enjoy the show. I have to give a quick content warning. In this episode, sex and sexual abuse is discussed, so listener discretion is advised. Today we are going to take a trip back in time when rebellion wore a leather jacket and had no cause. We are going to dive into the life of a sex symbol and a legend that left a real fucking legacy. Hi, my name is Courtney Jewell, and you are listening to the 18th episode of the 5th season of History Shelf, a podcast about history that proves that sometimes fact is even more interesting than fiction. Welcome to Season 5 of History Shelf. This season is titled History, Taylor's version. That is because these 14 people that I will be covering this season all have one thing in common. The one thing they have in common is they all have been name dropped in a Taylor Swift song. Now, don't stop listening if you are not a fellow Swiftie like me. This season is not going to be about Taylor Swift. You don't have to be a Swiftie to enjoy this season. You just have to be a history lover. So please, stay. What we are going to do is you and I are going to go on a little adventure that spans 2,404 years. Who I am going to cover this season are fearless leaders, people from the screen, poets straight from the Tortured Poets department, and people who are just trying to find a place in this world. Some of these stories may be stories of happiness. They may be sad, beautiful, tragic. But long story short, I hope that you will be enchanted to get to know the stories of these historical figures all too well. So, are you ready for it? For this week, I am talking about James Dean. James Byron Dean was born on February 8, 1931 in Marion, Indiana, United States. His mother was Mildred Marie Wilson, and his father was Winton Orlando Dean. James was his parents' only child. The Deans only stayed in Indiana until James was 6 years old. Winton was a dental mechanic, and he was transferred to Santa Monica, California. James was very close to his mother. In 1938, Mildred started to have stomach pains, and she quickly lost a lot of weight. Mildred had uterine cancer. She died on July 14th, 1940. She was 29 years old. James was just 9 years old. Now, I told you that we know that Mildred died of uterine cancer, but apparently James didn't know. Or at least he didn't know in 1948. In 1948, James said in his own words, quote, "I never knew the reason for Mom's death. In fact, it still preys on my mind," end quote. After his mother's death, James's father didn't know how to raise him, so he sent James back to Indiana to live with his aunt and uncle, Hortense and Marcus Winslow. Hortense was Winton's sister. Even from an early age, James was interested in the arts. This is James, quote, "I studied violin, played in concerts, tap danced on theater stages, but most of all, I like art, to mold and create things with my hands. I came back to Indiana to live with my uncle. I lost the dancing and violin, but not the art. I think my life will be devoted to art and dramatics. And there are so many different fields of art, it would be hard to foul up. And if I did, there are so many different things to do: farm, sports, science, geology, coaching, teaching music. I got it, and I know if I better myself that there will be no match. A fellow must have confidence," end quote. When James was young, he sought companionship, and he found it in a Methodist pastor named James DeWeerd. Since both of them were named James, I'm going to refer to the pastor by his last name. DeWeerd was very influential to James. DeWeerd shared James's love for art. He got James into bullfighting and car racing. DeWeerd also took advantage of James. It is believed that DeWeerd sexually abused James. There have been many reports about this. Author Paul Alexander wrote about it in Boulevard of Broken Dreams, The Life, Times, and Legend of James Dean. When I cover a person, I approach it as I'm assuming everyone listening knows absolutely nothing about the person that I'm covering. I, of course, know that that's not the case, but I think that is the best way to go about an episode because I don't know just how much knowledge that you do have about a person. And I have covered people from all over the world, and I have listeners from all over the world. But I don't feel like I am spoiling anything by telling you that James was a famous Hollywood actor. I feel like that is probably common knowledge. James played in a film in 1955 called Giant. One of James's co-stars was someone that made a guest appearance on the Richard Burton episode of History Shelf, and that is Elizabeth Taylor. It has been reported that James told Elizabeth that DeWeerd started sexually abusing him about 2 years after his mother died. So James would have been about 11 years old. Joe Hyams was someone that knew James, and he wrote the biography James Dean, Little Boy Lost. In the book, Joe talked about how after James's mother died and his father sent him back to Indiana, James thought that he was evil. And he thought that because he was evil, that was why his mother died, and that was why his father sent him away. And even though Winton remarried in 1940 to a woman named Ethel May Cass, Winton didn't send for James to come back home, now that he had someone to help raise his son and be a mother figure to him. So James stayed with Winton's sister and brother-in-law, and I'm sure that didn't help ease James's fears that he was evil. James was really worried that he was evil and people would find out and they would not love him. James told DeWeerd this, and DeWeerd could have at least tried to ease James's fears and could have told James that he wasn't the reason why his mother was dead, but instead, DeWeerd leaned into it. This is DeWeerd himself, quote, "I taught Jim that he was depraved and vile, that he had to seek salvation," end quote. And, of course, DeWeerd was the one that was going to give James that salvation. DeWeerd then started sexually abusing James. I read some sources that were trying to portray the relationship between James and DeWeerd as a mutual sexual thing. But I want to remind you of 3 things. 1, when James allegedly told Elizabeth Taylor about all of this, he said that he was abused. 2, telling James that he was evil was really manipulative. And 3, even if DeWeerd hadn't been manipulative and James had consented to everything that took place, it still would have been abuse because James was a child. DeWeerd, of course, told James to keep what was happening a secret. I know that you are not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but if you are not new to this podcast, then you know that I am not unwilling to call out a bastard in history when I find one. And James DeWeerd was a bastard. James did well in school, and he was popular. He was a jock. He played baseball and varsity basketball, but he was also into theater. He also competed in public speaking through the Indiana High School Forensic Association. James graduated from Fairmont High School in May of 1949. After high school, James moved back to California. He moved in with his father and stepmother. He was going to St. Monica College. He was a pre-law major. He didn't stay there, though. He transferred to University of California, Los Angeles. He was there for a semester before he did something similar to what Robert Bly did. James changed his major from pre-law to drama. And if you remember back 2 weeks ago, Robert Bly's major was first pre-med before he changed it to English literature. So while James didn't do the exact same thing that Robert did, there are similarities. James tried to patch things up with his father when he moved back to California, but there was tension there. Quentin didn't like the fact that James had changed his major to drama. He wanted James to pick a traditional career path. So there was some bad blood going on between James and his father. James pled to the fraternity Sigma Nu, but was never initiated. While in college, James was Malcolm in the play Macbeth, written by a previous subject of this podcast, William Shakespeare. James started acting in the actor James Whitmore's workshop. James dropped out of college in January of 1951 to pursue acting full-time. Before James dropped out of college, James started dating Beverly Willis. Beverly would go on to an acting career as well. They met each other on a blind date, just like Robert Bly and his first wife did. Beverly said when they were on their first date, James was kind of embarrassed of his car because of how slow his car was. He told her that he hated anything slow. James was shy at first, but he started to open up when he began talking about acting. James and Beverly, in 1950s terms, went steady for 7 months. James and Beverly would double date with James's friend William Bast and a classmate, Jeanette Lewis. James also dated Jeanette. Then James and Beverly started going on dates by themselves. Beverly said that James would have major mood swings. She said that they went to a movie one time and he was really into it and he had a kind of somber mood when they left the theater. When they got to his car, he didn't say a word, and then suddenly he just said that he felt like some music and he started singing "Row, Row, Row Your Boat." It is believed that James may have been bipolar. That is what it sounds like, but I have said this before on this podcast, and I will say it again. It is really hard to diagnose the deceased. James didn't care about his look. He often appeared disheveled. There was a former luncheon that he showed up to barefoot and in filthy jeans. When he ended up making it as an actor, he would show up to rehearsals in pants that were held together with safety pins. According to Beverly, James didn't own a lot of clothes. There was one time that he spilled coffee on his slacks, and he got mad at himself because that was the only pair of slacks that he owned, and he wanted to wear them the next day to his studio to see about a job. Getting into the acting world didn't just happen to James, and he would get angry when he didn't get a part. Sometimes he would be told that he was too short, and James couldn't understand how his height had anything to do with his acting ability. He was 5'8", in case you were wondering. Sometimes he would be told that he wasn't good looking enough, which is really funny, seeing how that he would later become a sex symbol. When he would be told that he wasn't good looking enough, he would insult them back. James desperately wanted a job in acting. One time, Beverly was doing a radio show of Junior Miss, and they needed a young man for a role. The director, Hank Garson, asked Beverly if James could handle it, and she said that he could. So Hank asked James if he had ever worked in radio, and James answered honestly and told him no. So Hank then walked away. Beverly wanted to know why James didn't just tell them yes, and James told her that he didn't want to lie to get the job. James started to have nightmares about death. He developed a phobia of death. He started sinking deeper and deeper into a depression. There was only a few things that could make him happy. One of the things that made James happy was riding his motorcycle. James and Beverly talked about getting married. They were going to elope on Beverly's 18th birthday. James didn't fit in with Beverly's happy friends. Teenagers can be cliquey sometimes and real assholes. They looked down on James, and he was really sensitive about that. James played football with them once, and they weren't playing rough because they had no protective gear. But James didn't hold back, and he hurt one of the guys. The group then refused to talk to him after that. James and Beverly were at a dance once, and they were dancing, and a boy wanted to cut in and dance with Beverly. James did not like that. He got angry, and he grabbed the poor guy by his collar and threatened to give him 2 black eyes. Beverly broke up with James after that. A few days later, James left for New York with a friend. A few months later, Beverly went to New York, and she went to see James because she wanted to remain friends, and he was still in the same blue jacket and gray slacks. James hadn't found any work yet. James told Beverly that he was seeing a lady bullfighter, and he told Beverly that he was going to try out for a play the next day, and if he didn't get the part, he was going to be a bullfighter in Mexico. James never made it to Mexico. When James was in college, he was in a Pepsi commercial. After he quit college, he was cast as John the Apostle in Hill Number 1. That was a television Easter special dramatizing the resurrection of Jesus. He had 3 walk-on roles in the movies Fixed Bayonets, Sailor Beware, and Has Anybody Seen My Gal? To make money, he worked as a parking lot attendant at CBS Studios. So if you were wondering how he was surviving, that was how. It was during this time that he met Rogers Brackett. Rogers was a studio director for an advertising agency. He offered up to James some career help and guidance and a place to stay. Rogers helped James get his first starring role on Broadway in See the Jaguar. Rogers also got James a role on his radio show alias Jane Doe. October of 1951 was when James moved to New York City. He became a stunt tester for the game show Beat the Clock. But he was fired because allegedly James performed the tasks too quickly. He also made appearances on the TV shows The Web, Studio One, and Lux Video Theater. He gained admission to the Actors Studio to study method acting under Lee Strasberg. In 1952, James got a non-speaking role in the movie Deadline, USA. He got more TV appearances in the shows Kraft Television Theater, Robert Montgomery Presents, the United States Steel Hour, Danger, and General Electric Theater. But it was James's role in the play The Immoralist that got Hollywood to finally pay attention to him. In that play, James played a homosexual North African houseboy. During that play, James had a 3.5-month affair with the actress Geraldine Page. And according to her daughter, Angelica Page, Geraldine never got over James. Geraldine had pictures of James taped to her mirror, even years after James's death. Geraldine remained friends with James, and she kept several drawings by him. James got his first big role in a Hollywood film when he was cast as Cal in the movie East of Eden. Most of James's performance in that movie was unscripted. That was something that James loved to do. He loved to ad-lib. He did that with one of his live TV performances. In the movie East of Eden, the role was of an outcast wanting the approval of his father. It would be a role that James would play again in the movie Rebel Without a Cause. It was a role that James played well. It was a role that James lived. After filming East of Eden, James started racing. His first professional event was the Palm Springs Road Races on March 26th through 27th, 1955. He got first place in the novice and second place in the main event. He raced in Bakersville the next month. There he finished first in his class and third overall. James wanted to compete in the Indianapolis 500, but he couldn't fit it into his schedule. James raced in Santa Barbara on Memorial Day, May 30th, 1955. He was unable to finish that race due to a blown piston. Warner Brothers made him press pause on his racing during the production of Giant. Rebel Without a Cause was James's next film, and it's great. He followed that film up with the movie Giant. He didn't want to be typecast, so his role in that film is not the role of an angsty teenager, but rather a Texan ranch hand that becomes wealthy when he strikes oil. In the last scene of the film, James's character is drunk. To get into character, James got drunk. Really, really drunk. So drunk that the scene had to be overdubbed by the actor Nick Adams because James's mumbles were hard to make out. James was next set to do the film Somebody Up There Likes Me, and the director of Rebel Without a Cause, Nicholas Ray, said that he was going to do a story called Heroic Love with James. But those things never happened. And before I talk about why they never happened, I want to talk more about James's personal life. James loved to act, as you already know, and he loved to race cars and perform magic tricks. James was a smoker, and a magic trick that he liked to do was he would put an unlit cigarette and a lit match into his mouth, and then he would pull out a lit cigarette from his mouth. James also had some relationships. I have already covered a few, but there were more. In 1952, he dated the actress Liz Sheridan. She wrote about the romance in her book Dizzy and Jimmy, My Life with James Dean, a love story. He dated the actress Barbara Glenn for 2 years. They had an on-again, off-again thing. James wrote Barbara love letters. In 2011, their love letters were sold at auction for $36,000. Barbara's son, Keith Gordon, said that some of the letters that James wrote Barbara were lovely, and he was really sweet. Keith said that it seemed that James was lonely and confused in the letters. Keith also said that in one letter, James seemed a little possessive. He was mad at Barbara for taking a swimsuit modeling job. He told Barbara that she was prostituting herself. James was linked romantically to other actresses. They mainly were other clients of his Hollywood agent, Dick Clayton. The biggest known relationship that James had was with the actress Piera Angeli. The actor Paul Newman introduced the two. It didn't take long for the paparazzi to start following them. James called Piera Annarella. It was a mix of her real first name, Anna, and Cinderella. This is what Pierre said about her relationship with James several years after they ended their relationship. Quote, "Sometimes we would just go for a walk along the beach, not actually speaking, but communicating silently to each other. We had complete understanding of each other. We were like Romeo and Juliet, together and inseparable. Sometimes on the beach, we loved each other so much, we just wanted to walk together into the sea, holding hands, because we knew then that we would always be together." End quote. James said this about Pierre, quote, "Everything about Pierre is beautiful, especially her soul. She doesn't have to be all gussied up. She doesn't have to do or say anything. She's just wonderful as she is. She has a rare insight into life." End quote. But there were things that pulled James and Pierre apart. One of those things was Pierre's mother, Enrichetta Romiti Pierre Angeli. Enrichetta didn't think that James was good enough for her daughter. She thought that he was untidy and ill-mannered. It was also an issue that James was an atheist. Pierre's family were Catholics. Warner Brothers also didn't want James married. James and Pierre continued their relationship in secret. They had been seeing each other for 6 months in November of 1954 when James asked Pierre to marry him. Pierre said yes. She told her mother the news 2 days later. After telling her mother, Pierre broke off her engagement to James and she ended their relationship. By the end of the month, Pierre was married to the singer Vic Damone. He was Catholic. The press was shocked and James was devastated. Gossip columnists wrote that James watched Pierre's wedding from across the road on his motorcycle. He gunned the engine during the ceremony, they said. James said that he would never do something that dumb. James then dated the actress Ursula Andress. It has been debated if James and Pierre's relationship was real. Pierre's marriage didn't last, and she went on to marry film composer Armando Travaoli. Friends of Pierre's claimed that Pierre said that James was the love of her life. After James died, an order for the solemnization of marriage pamphlet with the name Pierre lightly penciled in every place the bride's name was supposed to go was found among James's things. The director of East of Eden, Elia Kazan, said that he heard James and Pierre having loud sex in James's dressing room. Richard Davalos was James's co-star in East of Eden, and he said that James did want to marry Pierre, and he was willing to have their children raised as Catholic. But not everyone was convinced that the relationship was real. James told Pierre he didn't want to marry. The author of Paul Alexander didn't buy it. And neither did James's friend William Bast. Remember him? I mentioned him earlier. William believed that James and Pierre was just a publicity stunt. The reason why he said that he didn't think the relationship was real was because he said that James was gay. Now, there had been a rumor going around before James and Pierre got together that James was gay, or maybe bisexual. James told the draft board that he was gay, so he wouldn't be drafted into World War II. If you don't know, in America there was a time when gay people could not serve in the military. But then the draft board started hearing that James was dating actresses, so they drafted him again, and he convinced them again that he was gay. He told a reporter that he wasn't going to get married until he was 30 years old. When he hit 30, he would no longer be of draft age. That may have been why James told Pierre that he did not want to get married. Another reporter asked James if he was gay, and James responded, quote, "I'm not a homosexual, but I'm not going through life with one hand tied behind my back," end quote. William Bast also claimed in his book Surviving James Dean that James Dean had been his lover. William talked about how James and him had been roommates and they kept the relationship private so it wouldn't hurt James's career. William was hopeful that one day they would be able to live together again. That would be a hope that would never come to be. When James and Rogers Brackett lived together, they shared a bed. James told people that they had separate beds, but that was a lie. James was also abused by the acting industry. After James acted in a live TV broadcast in 1952, the director told him that there might be more parts for him if James let the director give him a blowjob. James knew to say no meant that he probably would be killing his career. So James just focused on a fly that was on the ceiling until it was over. More powerful men in the acting world would use James this way. At first, James said that it was no big deal. Then he told William that he felt like a whore. As time went on, the anger that James buried deep inside of him came to the surface. He would erupt into rude, aggressive, or even dangerous behavior. Now, let's get to the reason why that James never got to do those projects that I talked about earlier. James entered the Salinas Road Race event that was scheduled for October 1st through the 2nd, 1955. So James took off from Los Angeles to Salinas in his 1955 Porsche 550 Spyder on September 30th. With James was stunt coordinator Bill Hickman, Collier's photographer Sanford Roth, and the mechanic who was from the Porsche factory that maintained James's Porsche, Rolf Weatherick. Rolf was actually the one who had encouraged James to drive the Porsche from Los Angeles to Salinas. It was 3:30 p.m. when California Highway Patrol officer Audie V. Hunter pulled James over for speeding. James was going 65 in a 55. Bill Hickman was behind James with the trailer for the Porsche. He was going 20 over the speed limit because he could legally only do 45 because he had the trailer. James stopped at Blackwell's Corner to get some refreshments. There he saw fellow racers Lance Reventlow and Bruce Kessler. They made plans to later meet for dinner. James and Bill Hickman left Blackwell's Corner at around 5:15 p.m. At around 5:45 p.m., 23-year-old Donald Turnipseed was driving a 1950 Ford Tudor when he crossed the center lane. James tried to steer the Porsche in a sidestepping maneuver, but James didn't have enough time or speed. The two men hit almost head-on. A witness named John Robert White said that James's car smashed into the ground 2 or 3 times in cartwheels and landed in a gully beside the shoulder of the road. Many ran to help. One of the people that helped was a woman that was a nurse. She checked James's pulse. It was weak. James's left foot was crushed between the clutch pedal and the brake pedal. He had a broken neck and internal and external injuries. Rolf Weatherick was lying nearly unconscious on the shoulder of the road. He had been thrown from the car. Donald Turnipseed had minor injuries. James was taken to Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival at 6:20 p.m. James died in the arms of Bill Hickman. He was 24 years old. There were reports that James was going 85 miles per hour, but it was determined that he was only doing 55. Rolf survived, though he would end up dying in a car crash on July 20th, 1981. Some sources say that Rolf told James to decelerate as Donald Turnipseed pulled into their lane. James said, quote, "That guy's got to stop. he'll see us, end quote. If that is true, those were James's last words. But that is probably not true because Rolfe said that he could not remember the moments before or after the crash. When James filmed Giant, James filmed a public service announcement for the National Safety Council. It was to tell people that speeding on the highway was more dangerous than racing on a track. The ending line was written, "The life you save may be your own." But, James, he loved to ad-lib. And so instead he said, quote, "The life you save may be mine," end quote. So, who was to blame? Well, Donald Turnipseed told a jury that he did not see the low-profile Porsche after he turned left on SR 41. It was declared an accidental death with no criminal intent. When the news broke out that James Dean had died, America was in shock. Girls fainted and boys choked back tears. Hundreds of fan clubs were created. James Dean received 5,000 fan letters a month after his death. 2 weeks after his death, James's movie Rebel Without a Cause was released. James was nominated posthumously for Best Actor Academy Award for Rebel Without a Cause. He was the first actor to be nominated posthumously. He was also nominated for Giant. Warner Brothers did their best to try and turn James into a saint that no one can be. They tried to erase the rough edges of him. His hard edges were smoothed away. They didn't want him to be seen as a rebel. Parents wouldn't like that, and they, of course, took away his queerness. Ballantine Books commissioned William Bass to write a biography of James. He knew, without being asked, that he had to take away all of the queer parts of James's life so he could protect the reputation of the man that he loved. But the LGBTQ community would find James again and reclaim him. In the mid-1970s, gay bars hung James's picture on the walls. Gay magazines and newsletters started talking about James. There was backlash from straight men because how dare the man that they modeled their masculinity after be gay? So they said that he was a predator and a sex worker and blah, blah, blah. You get the picture. James's funeral was on October 8th, 1955 at the Fairmount Friends Church in Fairmount, Indiana. It was a closed casket due to James's injuries. About 600 mourners were there with 2,400 fans outside of the church. James was buried at Park Cemetery in Fairmount, Indiana. Since James's death, there have been memorials dedicated to him. In 1977, there was a memorial that was erected in Chalami, California. That's where James died. It is in front of the post office building. It is a stainless steel sculpture around a tree of heaven. Etched into the sculpture are the dates and hours of James's birth and death, and there is also a handwritten description by William Bast, quoting one of James's favorite lines from the novel The Little Prince. It reads, quote, "What is essential is invisible to the eye," end quote. There's also an infinity symbol next to the date of James's death to indicate that he will never be forgotten. On September 30th, 2005, the junction at SR 46 and SR 41 was dedicated as the James Dean Memorial Junction. After James's death, there was a myth going around that James's Porsche, the one that he died in, which is called Little Bastard, was cursed. People that have used any parts from the car, they have been involved in car wrecks, and they have been hurt, and one person died, though most of these stories have not been confirmed. The actor Alec Guinness said that he saw James's car on September 23rd, 1955, so exactly a week before the crash. Alec said that he told James, quote, "Please never get in it. It is now 10 o'clock, Friday, the 23rd of September, 1955. If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week," end quote. In 1960, Little Bastard went missing, and no one knows where it or James's other Porsche went to. James only starred in 3 movies in his life, but his legacy has lasted decades. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It is located at 1719 Vine Street. American Film Institute ranked James 18th best male movie star of Golden Age Hollywood in AFI's 100 Years, 100 Stars list. All of James's films have been preserved in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. James is so beloved even today because he had it all. He was arrogant, but he had self-doubt. He was aggressive, but he was sensitive. He was a jock, and he was into theater. There have been documentaries about James Dean, documentaries like The Stuff of Legend, James Dean's Final Ride, and James Dean Forever Young. James has been the center of TV shows, films, books, and plays. Plays like Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, Jimmy Dean. TV shows like James Dean, The First American Teenager, and James Dean, Outside the Lines. Movies like James Dean, one made in 1976 and one made in 2001. James Dean, Race with Destiny, Joshua Tree, 1951, A Portrait of James Dean, and Life. He has inspired so many actors. He has had an impact on fashion. His signature style of jeans, white t-shirts, and leather jackets left a mark on youth culture and influenced fashion trends. Time magazine declared James as one of the all-time 100 fashion icons. His style can even be found in men's fashion today. James also has inspired music. He influenced people like Elvis Presley, Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, and Bob Dylan, just to name a few. James has popped up in songs by the Beach Boys, the Eagles, the Goo Goo Dolls, Lana Del Rey, Adam Lambert, The Weeknd, and Taylor Swift. Taylor mentions James in her song Style. It is track 3 off of her 5th studio album, 1989. And that was the life of James Dean. Thank you so much for listening to the 18th episode of the 5th season of History Shelf. And thank you for listening to the 5th season. I hope that you have enjoyed this season, even if you aren't a Swiftie. And if you are a Swiftie, I hope that you have enjoyed learning about the people that Taylor Swift has been talking about in her music. I already know what the theme for the next season of History Shelf is going to be, but I'm not going to reveal it now. For the past 2 seasons, I have teased what the theme is going to be before I start a new season. And that's been fun. I've been teasing it on social media. So that brings me to my social media accounts. I am on TikTok. It's at History Shelf. I am in America, so I don't know how long I'm going to have TikTok. But I always upload my TikTok videos to other social media platforms that I'm on. I also upload them to YouTube. My Instagram is at history_shelf_pod. I'm also on Threads as that. The Twitter is at History Shelf Pod. Blue Sky is History Shelf Podcast. And so is the Facebook page. And like I said, I also upload the videos to YouTube. So I'll continue to make videos that I have been making, like on TikTok. And I know most of you listen to me on YouTube. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Also, before we go, if you want to help out this podcast financially, there are a few ways you can do that. One is you can buy merch from the History Shelf merch store, or you can become a Patreon. This podcast is always going to be free, but there are some perks that come along with becoming a Patreon. The first tier is called History Student, and that is $1 a month. And with that, I will give you a shout out on all social media platforms that History Shelf is on. I will also choose one Patreon at random for each episode I do, and at the end of the episode, I will give that Patreon a shout out. The second tier is called History Fan, and that is $3 a month, and with that, you get the first tier. Plus, you get to vote in a poll that helps me choose the theme for the next season of this podcast. The third tier is called History Buff, and that is $20 a month. And with that, you get the first 2 tiers, plus you will get a handwritten note of things mailed to you from me. And the last tier is called History Lover, and that is $40 a month. And with that, you get the first 3 tiers, plus you get to choose one item from the History Stuff merch store. You can choose any item that you want except for the zip-up hoodie. I also have a gig on Fiverr that lets you take out ad space on this podcast. And I have some affiliated links. There's one for Amazon, there's one for Riverside, and there's one for Bookshop. If you click on one of those affiliated links, you buy something that helps support the podcast. But as always, the best way that you can help support this podcast is just to continue to listen to it. And there are a few other ways that you can help out this podcast for free. One is if you are listening on a platform that lets you rate this podcast 5 stars and or leave a positive review. If you do that, that would be very helpful. Also, sharing this podcast on social media with your friends and family would be very helpful. All right, well, until next season, keep learning, keep loving history, and come back for next season. Bye.